Today I wanted to talk about this thing. This is my new, well, relatively new, I got it about 2 months ago, telephoto lens that I'm absolutely in love with. I'm not gonna lie to you. This is a Sony FE mount 70 to 200 millimeter f4 lens. That is a absolute mouthful. This thing was released in 2014, and obviously that's not brand spanking new, but this thing is awesome regardless. And I'm honestly just gonna spend this video kind of just glazing this thing because I love it, and I think it's a great option for people who don't want to spend upwards of 2.7 grand on a telephoto lens, but they do want something that's a little bit better quality. I'm gonna talk about focal length, aperture, size and weight, autofocus, image stabilization, and then I'll obviously tell you how much it costs at the end. And then I'll go over a couple downsides that I don't think are too substantial, but I definitely think they're worth mentioning. So obviously the first thing is focal length. This thing goes from 70 all the way up to 200 millimeters. I think that is awesome for street photography. I personally like to focus on people more when I'm going out to do street photography, so having this thing is really nice because I can zoom in on people from like across the street or whatever, or zoom in on subjects from far away. Because if you're like me and you're a little bit more of a shy street photographer, you don't want to have like a 50 millimeter where it's like, I want to get that subject, but I have to get closer to them. I don't want to do that. This thing is really nice. You don't have to do that. You don't have to be that asshole with the camera shoving it in their face like, do you mind if I use you as a subject? So it does make it a little bit easier if you're a little bit more of a shy street photographer, which is, I mean, this is kind of honestly a no-brainer. That's what a telephoto lens is kind of meant for in street photography. The other thing too that I don't know if people talk about too much, but I do sometimes like to photograph buildings like these couple pictures here. When the conditions are right, they look like this, and this is awesome. And I would not be able to do this with my Sigma lens because the Sigma lens only goes up to 70, whereas this goes all the way to 200, so I can zoom in all the way up to the top of that building where you can see that part of it's like going into the clouds. It looks awesome. In multiple different scenarios for street photography specifically, I love this thing. Sports photography, obviously this thing's awesome too. I actually haven't gotten to use it yet in sports, but I will be pretty soon, and I can't wait. I'll be shooting video, which is what makes the fixed aperture on this thing really awesome as well, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about. So this thing has a fixed aperture of f4, and I think that is a huge deal for video specifically, because that means since it's fixed, as you zoom in all the way to 200, the f4 is going to stay f4 the entire time at 70 all the way up to 200. So that means your video won't get darker as you're zooming in, so you can zoom in and out as you want. You won't have to worry about your footage getting lighter or darker, which might make it a pain in the ass for color grading later. But for photography specifically, fixed focal length is obviously helpful. It's not necessarily a huge deal, but it is sometimes nice that it's like you don't have to zoom in. It's like, oh, it got darker, now I gotta up my ISO or something like that, or lower my shutter speed. That is kind of nice. I don't think it's a huge deal. What I do think is a huge deal is the f4. So the old telephoto lens I had was like I think it was a 55 to 210 millimeter. And as I zoomed all the way into 210 millimeters, the aperture went all the way up to like, I want to say 6.3, which was horrible. So low light situations, yeah, no shot. So having this thing at f4 is really nice because it helps with low light. Obviously, if you want to do nighttime photography, it's really good. Indoor photography, anything like that. Basically any low light situation, this thing is pretty nice. It's not 2.8, but also I'm not rich, so it's a really good happy medium between a like 2.8 and something that's a little bit cheaper. Another thing is this thing's autofocus is pretty smooth. With the old telephoto lens I had, it didn't really have too many issues with autofocus, but there were a couple times when I would be shooting lacrosse games with my little dinky 55 to 210 millimeter, the autofocus kind of struggled a little bit. But this thing, I can kind of notice it's a little bit smoother and is definitely a little bit quicker. Another thing is the in-lens stabilization, which I personally believe, especially for a telephoto lens, is an absolute necessity. I've only come across like one telephoto lens in my little research that doesn't have OSS. It was like a 300 millimeter Tamron lens that I considered buying, and then saw that it didn't have OSS, and I'm like, yeah, no. This is a huge deal in my opinion for telephoto lenses, because if you're zoomed all the way into 200 millimeters, the little shaking that your hands are doing comes out as a lot of shaking to your camera because you're zoomed all the way in. So if you have to shoot at maybe a little bit of a slower shutter speed, you might get a little bit of motion blur in there. You might get a lot of motion blur in there, which obviously drives us all nuts. For video specifically as well, I believe this is also a really big necessity. So the OSS is definitely a huge deal for me, and this thing obviously has it, does a great job. So there's really only two slight downsides that I see with this thing. One of them is being the size and the weight. This thing's like 1.8 pounds, which is pretty heavy. It's still not as heavy as my Sigma lens, but it's still not light. So it is a little bit heavy, but boo-hoo, who cares? You know, lenses are heavy. The big thing is kind of the size. So if you don't have a pretty nice backpack that can fit this thing in, it can be a little bit of a pain in the ass. The reason this thing is so long is that because you can zoom in and out and it doesn't move. It doesn't like pop out or anything like that. It stays the same. So it is a little bit longer. I mean, it's kind of a smaller downside, but it is still something you might want to think about. Am I going to need to buy a new backpack if I buy this thing? The only other minor downside to this thing, which is kind of a no-brainer, is that you can only zoom out to 70 millimeters. So if you have this thing on and you're like, oh wait, I want to get a wide shot of this, it's not going to happen. It is a telephoto lens, so it goes only down to 70 millimeters. So if you want to get a wide shot, you're going to have to switch lenses. Like I said, it's kind of a no-brainer, but it's definitely something to be aware of, that if you want to do street photography, like I know some creators like to do wide shots to get the environment around their subject or just to get the environment in general. This thing's probably going to be pretty difficult to do that with. You probably want something more like a 35 or 24. Two kind of minor downsides, and they're both kind of no-brainers with a telephoto lens. So just something to think about. So now for the price of this thing. So I bought this thing for $850. I think it was like $950 after tax. I got it on MPB, so that is actually a used price. It was in the best condition, but it is a used price. And I know for a lot of people that sounds like a lot, and trust me, for me it was. That definitely hurt the bank account for me, but I knew I would love it. I knew I wanted it for street photography. I knew I needed it for sports. And although it sounds like a lot, in comparison to other like professional telephoto lenses, it's not that much, man, trust me. There's this f4, and then there's also an f4 Mark II, which I want to say came out in 2017. I could be wrong on that. Just the Mark II version of this thing is like $1,700. So in comparison to the other and I mean, don't even get me started on like the G Master 2.8s. I mean, those things are an absolute fortune. This thing is a really good option for someone like me. Like I'm not really a beginner, but I also don't think I deserve something that's like 2.7 grand. Basically what I'm trying to say is that this is a pretty good option if you're not a beginner, but you also do not want to spend $2,000 on a lens. It's under $1,000. It does its job very well. Also, look at this thing. This is the lens hood too. The lens hood is a little bit big, but I mean, it goes on backwards like most of them do. Like that. But it does. Also, really quick, the reason I'm making this video is before buying this lens, I did a little bit of research to get some reviews on this thing. And I only found like one, and it was just a comparison between the Mark I, which is this one, and the Mark II, which was the video that led me to buy the Mark I with full confidence, because it looks like there was damn near no difference between the two other than the size. But anyway, look at this thing. I mean, yeah, if you're walking around with this, I mean, people are gonna think you're the real deal, even if you're not. Like me. You pull up to a photo shoot with this, you're gonna be like, oh my lord, I gotta pay this guy more. Yeah, I wish. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope this video helped you out a little bit. This is a pretty good professional option if you're not rich. If you're not a beginner, but you're also not like a straight up professional. Like I said, this thing is a really good option. If you guys have any more budget-friendly telephoto options that aren't pieces of garbage like the Sony one that I was shooting with before, definitely let me know in the comments. Maybe someone else will find that helpful as well. But yeah, if you did enjoy the video, I hope you like and subscribe. That'll help me out. It'll let me know that what I'm doing is helping you guys out. And I'll see you later.